Hey, everybody. Good evening and welcome to episode 18 of the Kennedy Americans podcast. We are broadcasting live exclusively tonight on X, on formerly known as Twitter Spaces. And thank you so much for joining us. I'd like to ask everyone who's listening to us right now, if you're on Twitter, to please retweet this space. Get it out to your listeners, get it out to your friends, and tell them it's happening. Tonight, we're having a very important discussion on probably the biggest foreign policy problem that the United States is facing right now. RFK Jr., 2024 independent presidential candidate. Is he right or is he wrong on his position on the Israel-Hamas war and the Israel-Palestine conflict? We want to hear from you tonight. And tonight's forum is going to be co-moderated by my friend, Christina Tobin. She is with Free and Equal Elections, and they'll be hosting independent and third-party presidential candidate debates coming up in the new year, I believe starting in January. And Christina, why don't you unmute your mic and say hello to everybody? How are you tonight?
Hi, Lori. Thanks so much for having me. I'm doing really well. How have you been?
Really, really good. I'm glad you could join us. Could you tell people a little bit about you and Free and Equal and what your plans are in 2024?
Oh, definitely. I founded Free and Equal Elections 15 years ago. It's a nonprofit. We've been hosting presidential debates for 15 years now. Broadcast legend Larry King and I co-moderated 2012, and we are gearing up to hold. We just locked in our venue for our first presidential debate of a series in 2024. It's going to be at XR Studios in Hollywood this February 29th. And some new news I hope to have confirmed come this Friday. We have received the full support to put on a Democratic debate as well. So I've already spoken to Marianne Williamson and the Dean Phillips campaign, Jason Palmer, Cenk Uygur of the Young Turks, and almost all are confirmed and on board. So we're going to be sending out the official invitations to the candidates tomorrow. We're looking at holding it hopefully on January 15th, Martin Luther King Day. So what an honor. The Democrats have not had a debate yet, and the energy's come our way. And for the February 29th debate, the top 6 candidates, we're going to launch a blockchain app on January 15th, which might be the same date that Free and Equal hosts the Democratic debate. And for that blockchain app, the people will vote the top 6 candidates they want in our February 29th debate, which will be open to every single candidate running for president. Will all have a chance to be voted in as the top 6 through our blockchain app powered by Nexus.io. So it's a pretty exciting year ahead that is for Free and Equal Elections.
That is absolutely incredible. I've been following these debates for years. I think I've watched every Free and Equal debate that you've ever done over the last 15 years. And I love what you do. And it sounds like you've got some really exciting plans for 2024. This is a very exciting election, the most exciting election of my lifetime, I think, of our lifetime. And of course, here we are in World War III. If there was ever a time for a president of peace, it's now. And of course, I am involved. I'm a volunteer on the Kennedy 24 campaign and support Bobby very strongly. Have for a long time. For those of you who don't know, I was involved with the Draft Kennedy campaign back in 2007, 2008. We were trying to convince him to run for president then, 16 years ago. But the time is now. This is exactly the right moment, I believe, for Robert F. Kennedy Jr. as our next president. And so tonight, I do want to let you know, everybody, that this space is being recorded. So if you miss it or you want to go back later and catch up on maybe some parts you missed, if you joined us late, there'll be a replay. You can go back and hit the replay button. After, I think, 60 days, 30 days or 60 days, Twitter deletes spaces just to, I guess, save space on their servers. So we don't want this to go away. We do archive it permanently for the record, for posterity. And we just repurpose these as a podcast. It's called Kennedy Americans. You can always listen to it later. We like to put it out on other platforms because not everybody uses Twitter. Not a lot of people know how to use Twitter Spaces. I think Twitter Spaces is wonderful. It's like a phone call that everybody can be on at the same time. It's a great way for Kennedy voters to interact, people who are curious about Kennedy. Maybe you don't know much about him. You might not know what his position is on this war and whether he supports Israel or Palestine or why. So we're going to talk about that. We're going to play you his own words and let you get up to speed on where he stands with this war. So if you're not comfortable having your voice recorded or preserved for posterity, I just wanted to forewarn you. Be advised that this space is being recorded. And please do share it with your friends who don't use X. It'll be available on YouTube. It'll be on Rumble, on Facebook, on a number of other platforms too that you can share it out on. We have a special guest speaker joining us tonight, my good friend Scott Ritter, former UN weapons inspector in the former USSR and in Iraq. And over his long career, he actually worked with the IDF and Israeli intelligence, and also for pretty much all his life strongly supported Israel. But that changed when this new war began, and Scott has since changed his mind and now supports Palestine. He no longer supports Israel. And tonight he will tell us why he thinks that Mr. Kennedy is wrong. And we'll be bringing Scott in just a few minutes. It's a pleasure to have Scott back with us tonight. I did want to let you know here at the beginning of the space about tonight's format and how it works. First, we're going to give Mr. Kennedy 15 minutes to explain his position on the Israel-Hamas war. And, it's from a recent interview that he did just this week with Patrick Bet-David and the PBD podcast. You can go to their YouTube channel if you want to hear the full, I think it's about an hour and a half long forum that he did. But Bobby spoke for about 15 minutes and outlined his position. He does support Israel, and he's going to tell you why he supports Israel. After that, we will give Scott Ritter, who feels differently, 15 minutes for a rebuttal. And after that, I'm just going to open up the floor. We'll have an open mic, and that's when I want to hear from you. A few ground rules before we begin. We ask that you keep your comments focused on the statements that you'll hear Mr. Kennedy make here at the beginning and not get too far out in left field or go off topic. Also, of course, we ask that you be polite and civil to Mr. Kennedy, to the moderators, and to other speakers in this space. We do have a one person, one mic rule, one person talking at a time. Please don't talk over each other. It just turns into a cacophony and nobody can understand what's being said. So if you do that, we'll have to mute your mic or maybe remove your speaking privileges. So please do stay focused on facts, not feelings. We ask that you back up your arguments with sources and statistics. We might ask you to post your sources in the comments. We do ask that you always post a link to further information that people can check out for themselves. And please do have your sources handy before you come up to speak at the mic. Once we go to the open mic portion of the program, we want to hear from everybody, all voices, all perspectives, pro-Israel perspectives, the pro-Palestine perspective, or maybe you don't take either side. Maybe you think both sides are wrong. We want to hear from you too. But mainly we want to know if you think that RFK's foreign policy is correct or incorrect. So if you want to speak tonight, here's how you do it. You might be new to Twitter Spaces. When we go to the open mic, all you have to do is hit the request button down in the lower left-hand corner, and I'll be rotating the panel out. You'll have about 3 minutes. We ask that you limit your comments to 3 minutes or this will go on all night. So we're asking people to stay brief. If you go over your time, Christina is going to be keeping time. She'll be setting a timer when each speaker begins. And if you go over time, she'll ring the buzzer to let you know that you've gone over time. So when you speak, we ask that you address your comments not to me or to Christina or the other panelists, but to speak as if you were speaking directly to Mr. Kennedy. If you were across the kitchen table from him and you were discussing the Israel-Palestine conflict, what would you say to him? And is he right? Is he wrong? Tell him why he's right or why you think he's wrong. And we will record this forum. We'll make sure that Mr. Kennedy gets a copy of it directly. So he will hear your thoughts tonight. And I know that he listens to the people and he's going to take everything you say under consideration. So I think here I'm just going to start off and play you guys what Mr. Kennedy said this week when he was on the PBD podcast. This is with Patrick Bet-David down in Florida. And he's going to speak for about 15 minutes and outline his position currently on the Israel-Palestine conflict, the war with Hamas.
First of all, Hamas itself is an extraordinarily wealthy organization that has, all of its top officials, literally all of them are billionaires. The top three people, Ismail Haniyeh and his two top cohorts. Ismail Haniyeh has $5 billion that he's stolen from, international aid. Yasser Arafat was a billionaire. His wife is a billionaire. Mahmoud Abbas, who's the current director of the West Bank, is a billionaire. His two sons have $750 million. Hamas has a war chest in real estate and stock investments of $500 million. Their biggest sponsor is Iran, who planned the attack. And Iran also, there's people in Iran who, if they had foreknowledge, could have bet on it. Do I exculpate the Israeli government for what happened? No. I think it's clear that President Netanyahu, first of all, has nurtured Hamas in many ways, the same way that we nurtured Al-Qaeda and that we nurtured ISIS. And he allowed the Qataris to give at least $1.5 billion over the past 3 years to Hamas, presumably because he thought he was buying peace. And then, his very aggressive policies in the West Bank have moved a lot of the military resources to the West Bank and take them off the Gaza fence line. But there's do I blame him? I blame him for, and Likud maybe for negligence. But Hamas has to take the full blame for what happened in Israel. Hamas has been, the Israelis have treated Hamas and Gaza in a way no other nation in the world would treat an enemy that declared war on them 16 years ago and has dropped 30,000 missiles on Israel. What did Israel do? Instead of going into Gaza, which every other country could have done, just flattened it. If the Mexican government elected if Mexican people elected a communist government, they hijacked the government and they said, okay, we're reclaiming Texas, and then sent missiles onto San Antonio and Houston. How long would it take for Mexico to be flat? Not long. We would go, and then what if they sent 3,000 terrorists to slit people's throats, burn babies, rape women, and all that? We would go in there. The Israelis have done something different. Instead of going into Gaza, they built a fence around it. Now Hamas says, oh, you put us in open air prison? Yeah, because you were sending suicide bombers across the border. We had an open border. You were sending suicide bombers over to kill us, and we had to put the fence up. And in order to stop the 30,000 missiles, they built an Iron Dome, which we helped them pay for. But when a missile's sent over, they shoot it down. Every missile that Hamas makes costs them about $800. To shoot it down costs $40,000. The Israelis have taken that and said, we're going to shoulder that burden because we don't want to go in there. And they thought it was under control. They put up the fence. The fence has cameras on it, has monitoring systems, it has automatic machine guns, and it has balloons that, look, and because Hamas was being aided by Iran, they got North Korean drones that were able to shoot down those balloons, that were able to disable the defenses, and then they used explosives and tractors to carve these holes in the fence. And Israel, up till that moment, felt like this was a tactical issue. Now, they get more, Gaza gets more money from the international aid community than any people on the face of the earth. Gaza has gotten more per capita than we gave to the Marshall Plan to rebuild all of Europe after World War II. The Israelis, when the Israelis walked out of Gaza unilaterally, said, we're giving it to you. We don't want any more disputes. They took 9,000 Jewish families who live there in beautiful houses along the Gaza coast. They forced them to leave. It was very unpopular. They didn't want their Jewish graves to be defaced, so they dug up the Jewish graveyards and brought them out. They removed the IDF, and they said, we're going to give you a going-away present to Hamas, to Gaza. We're going to give you 3,000 greenhouses that are worth a lot of money, that make Gaza food self-sufficient. Not only that, a net food exporter. And for free, we are going to rebuild the port of Gaza, which is a beautiful port, but it's inadequate, and so that you can make it the Singapore of the West. Gaza should be an Eden, an economic Eden, with all the money that's being poured in there. But what have they done with the money, Hamas? They've hijacked their own people. They have deprived and starved their own people. They've made all of their leaders billionaires. They don't even live in Gaza. They live in Doha, and they live in Ankara in Turkey, and Doha and Qatar, in huge palaces, and surrounded by guards. They built 300 miles of tunnels. This is what they did with the money they were supposed to be building for people, poor Palestinians, who are stuck in refugee camps. Build them houses. We put plenty of concrete money. They built 300 miles of tunnels, 1,300 tunnels, and they bought weapons. They bought drones, they bought missiles, they tore up the state-of-the-art irrigation system and that the Israelis had built. You know, Gaza is an oasis. That's why it's there. It had great fresh water. They've destroyed it. They destroyed the fresh water. It's now all saltwater infiltration because they stopped regulating well drilling. They tore up the irrigation system and they cut the irrigation pipes into rockets, turned them into rockets, and fired them at Israel. 30,000 rockets before October 7th, 10,000 since. Now, one of the things they say is, oh, the Israelis are using collective punishment to starve us, right? And I have friends in Gaza, Palestinian friends. And I have a lot of Palestinian friends all over Israel and the West Bank. I've met with all the Palestinian leadership in the West Bank. Israel, because Gaza mismanaged, Gaza has plenty of fresh water. They have some of the best desalination plants in the world. But they don't have any fuel for it. Why don't they have fuel? First of all, Israel, because they mismanaged their water, Israel built its own pipes out of humanitarian impulse to pump water into Gaza. It's only 9% of the water, so they're not shutting off all the water. They shut off their little 9%. Why? Because Hamas bombed the pipes. And then they wouldn't let food. Hamas, to this day, is sending hundreds of rockets every day. Why is Israel going to bring food in there and get bombed by rockets and fuel trucks? Now, Hamas says, oh, you didn't give us enough food for the hospitals. Hamas, in the tunnels, is storing 1.5 million liters of fuel. And they were starving their own population. They didn't build a single bomb shelter in all of Gaza. They said the tunnels, we don't let them into the population into the tunnels. Those are for our fighters, 40,000 fighters. They're the ones who get to stay in the tunnels. The population is up there, and they put their armories, their fuel dumps, their headquarters, their command headquarters under mosques, hospitals, residential housing, and schools. They use their civilians as shields. And how do we know they have all this fuel? Well, there's proof. Because those weapons and rockets they're sending on Israel right now, 10,000 since October 7th, require huge amounts of fuel to fire them. So they were using the fuel for the rockets and not letting their public get it for the incubators in the hospital. What did Israel do? Risk the lives of IDF soldiers to go into Gaza and bring the incubators, enough fuel for those incubators. And Hamas told the hospital administrators, if you go to the corner and pick them up, because Israel left it on the corner, they didn't want to go in there, we'll shoot you. And so then Israel sent IDF soldiers to actually bring it into the hospital. Now, they say they're targeting civilians. Well, here's what Israel has done. Israel used high tech to avoid civilian casualties. It's made 20,000 phone calls with Israeli soldiers who speak Arabic before they bomb a building. If they're going to bomb a target that is a high value target, like a terrorist and a group, they don't give any warning. 90% of their targets are infrastructure, and they always warn in advance. And they've warned people to go to the south so that they can root out the terrorists. But they also go neighborhood by neighborhood and say, tomorrow we're going to bomb your neighborhood. They make phone calls to the landlords and to the individuals, but a lot of their phones don't have connectivity now. So they drop leaflets. Leaflets are color-coded by neighborhood and by time, so that you know that it was meant for you on this date. You're not picking up an old leaflet and reading it. They've made 1.2 million robocalls, sent 1.2 million leaflets. And then, before they bomb an apartment building, they send a little piece of ordnance, a little tiny missile called a roof knocker. They send it from a drone or a helicopter, and it goes and hits the top. And everybody knows that's the signal that within 1 hour or 2 hours, that building is going to be dropped. They warn them. What happens? Hamas won't let the people leave. It forced them to stay there because that's how it makes money, by killing its own civilians. And there's never been an army in the history of the world that has been more willing to sacrifice its mothers, its wives, its daughters, and its children to the enemy. And if you think there's not a moral difference between Hamas and Israel, consider this. What would happen if Israel decided to use human shields? Do you think Hamas would stop? Every Jew in Israel would be killed. Hamas's charter, incidentally, says it's against Islam to negotiate with Jews unless you're fooling them. Number two, Israel doesn't exist. It is our country, and we are going, and our mission is to annihilate it. Number three, we're not only going to kill every Jew in Israel, we're going to kill every Jew in the world. That's in its charter. And this isn't old language. Ismail Haniyeh was on RT a week ago saying, yeah, that's what we're going to do. We're going to do this again and again and again and again. Telling Israel, you've got to negotiate. What are they going to negotiate over? Hamas considers it against a violation, a treachery to Islam, to negotiate with the Israelis. I don't see, my heart breaks for the Palestinian people. And I have a friend who's there who has 5 children, who's in South Gaza right now, and I sent him money this morning. And their lives are horrible, but I don't blame the Israelis. I'm not co-signing anything for Netanyahu or Likud, but I blame Hamas.
Okay, he said he blames Hamas. It kind of cut off there at the end. So that's Mr. Kennedy's position, and let me bring in Scott Ritter for a rebuttal to that. Scott, you want to unmute your mic? Good evening, sir. Nice to talk to you again.
Good evening. Thanks for inviting me.
Thanks for coming.
Is the floor mine?
It is all yours.
Well,
go right ahead, Scott.
Well, Bobby, and I'm going to be addressing Bobby. I couldn't disagree with you more. And let's just start with a little story. When I was in college, I was a Marine Corps officer candidate. Going through the training in the summer. And I had a roommate, an American citizen, an American Jew, who had just finished his time as an IDF soldier. That means he wore the uniform of the Israeli Defense Force. He called himself an American, but he wore the uniform of the Israeli Defense Force. And when I challenged him on this, he said, we're the same. There's no inherent conflict of interest. But I beg to differ. You see, I went to college in the early 1980s. In February of 1983, outside of Beirut, there was an American Marine Corps contingent whose job was to provide a buffer around Beirut to separate Israeli forces from the Palestinian Liberation Organization. And at one time, 3 Israeli tanks drove aggressively towards the Marine lines as if they were going to cross and head towards Beirut. They were confronted by a Marine Corps captain, Captain Johnson, who had to jump up on a tank, pull his pistol, and put it in the face of the Israeli officer and tell him, you will pass these lines over my dead body. And for 50 minutes, there was a standoff. And I asked my roommate, if you were driving that tank, because you drove tanks for the Israeli Defense Force, and you were ordered to kill that Marine captain, an American, what would you have done? Do you see what I'm saying, Bobby? They aren't us. They're not Americans. They serve their own national interests. So stop acting as if you owe them anything. You do not. You owe America everything, Bobby. You want to be an American president. And so you need to start acting like one. Bobby, you yourself have said this. You quoted, I remember this. It's one of the things that attracted me to you when you quoted your uncle's speech at American University that he delivered, the commencement speech. And, you know, what he said during that commencement speech was amazing about how we need to perceive things from the standpoint of those whom we are opposed to. When he talked about the Soviet Union. But the other thing he said is we have to guard ourselves against falling victim to propaganda. He chastised the Soviets for their anti-American views because he said they were not factually sound. But he said we ourselves as Americans must guard against falling into that same trap. Bobby, you have fell into that same trap. Listening to your presentation proves you do not have an accurate fact base upon which you are working. Every fact you have cited in your statement is wrong. And it is propaganda of the vilest sort. Let's start with the money, Bobby. The money, the billions that you say Hamas has. What are your sources? Shmuley Botek, your rabbi advisor, or maybe some other people in Israel. I've done the research on this, Bobby. There are no sources. You can go to a 2014 article that quotes an obscure reserve colonel in the Israeli Defense Force who is teaching at West Galilee University, who says that Arab sources claim that this is the case. Bobby, if that's your source, you're wrong. You don't have any evidence that they are billionaires, and yet you're spouting it as if it's fact. That's dangerous, Bobby. The water pipes weren't put there because Israel felt good for them, had goodness out of their heart for the Palestinians. They were there because these wonderful Israeli citizens you speak of in Gaza, they were illegal settlers, Bobby, illegal settlers. They weren't there legitimately. That's why Israel pulled them out and their wonderful homes and everything, illegally occupying Palestinian territory. You know, you said that one accurate thing you said was that the Palestinians are in refugee camps, Bobby. And you said, why don't they build good houses? Bobby, because that's not where they belong. They're in refugee camps. They belong in their homes, in their land, the land that is illegally occupied by Israel to this day. Bobby, don't just take my words. In 2004, the International Court of Justice passed an opinion that has the weight of international law that says straight up that Israel is an occupying power. You want to be an American president, Mr. Kennedy? Then respect the Constitution. And the Constitution requires you to respect the United Nations Charter. And the United Nations Charter has listed the International Court of Justice as the preeminent arbiter of international law. So under international law, Israel is an illegal occupying authority, power. That's it. And the pipes that the Palestinians dug up were pipes laid down by an illegitimate occupier to support illegal settlements. And yes, the Palestinians turned in them weapons, Bobby. We know this. We see them fired every day. But what would you have them do, Bobby? Would you have the Minutemen at Concord and Lexington turn in their muskets to the British because the British took umbrage? How about the Israelis themselves, Bobby? What do you think happened in 1946, 47, 48? You talk about the tunnels. You talk about Hamas going underground. What do you think Haganah, Palmach, Irgun, and the other Israeli resistance forces did, Bobby? You might want to do the research on the Ayalon Institute, Bobby, and find out how the Israelis themselves dug an underground ammunition factory under a kibbutz specifically manned with teenagers, Bobby. Teenagers using civilians as cover. So let's not get on your high horse Israel is an illegal occupying power. The Palestinians have every right to resist, and resist they do. You speak of fuel, Bobby. Be careful here, pal. I'm the missile expert. You're not. Don't repeat the garbage that you've been given by the Israelis. You don't use gasoline in these fuel, in these rockets. The rockets are powered by sugar and fertilizer, Bobby. Sugar and fertilizer. There's no gasoline involved whatsoever. So please don't equate the two. And you know, Bobby, that when the gasoline goes in, here's the other thing, the proof that it continues to be an occupying power. Everything that goes into Gaza has to go through what's called the Kogat. That's the Israeli occupying governmental agency for the territories. The Civilian Liaison Administration, CLA of Gaza, they control everything that happens in Gaza to this day. You speak of water. How about do some research on Military Order 158, Bobby? And you understand that Israel's military controls every aspect of the water that goes into Gaza, every aspect of the water that takes place in the West Bank. It is an occupying authority, Bobby. So you need to be careful with your facts. Get your facts straight. But more importantly, you need to be careful with your principles. Please don't ever use that Mexico analogy again. That was embarrassing. Because America doesn't flatten anything, Bobby, and we damn sure don't flatten Mexico. We don't flatten cities. That's not what we do. Because when we go to war, and you would be an American president, commander in chief of the American military, so don't insult me or anybody else who wore the uniform by implying that we would participate in any effort to flatten Mexico. What an absurd analogy to use. It's a violation of international law. It's a violation of everything we stand for. It's a violation of the principles that I took an oath to uphold and defend. The same oath you would take as president. So don't ever do that again, Bobby. And be careful when you start legitimizing what Israel is doing. Do some research on the Dahiyah principle or doctrine. In 2006, Israel initiated a policy of mass repression, collective punishment. It is a de facto violation of the law of war. The Israelis stipulate that the purpose is to provide so much punishment to a civilian population that they would pressure their government to change. They started in 2006. They've been doing it ever since, and it's happening right now in Gaza. This isn't precision targeting, Bobby. Ask the IDF about the artificial intelligence they use. Let me give you a hint here, pal. When Hamas launched its attack on October 7th, they compromised Israel's intelligence. They compromised the human intelligence networks. They compromised the signals intelligence network. This means that Israel's flying blind in Gaza. So Israel's not operating on insider knowledge. Israel uses an artificial intelligence program called, I believe it's the Habsora, or the Gospel. Basically, they have mapped out the entire neighborhoods in Gaza. Every building, they know when they drop a bomb on point A, how many civilian casualties would take place. This is done deliberately, Bobby. It's murder. It's genocide. You can't support it. 6,000 American-made bombs dropped by hundreds of American-made aircraft flown by Israeli pilots. They are violating American law. Our own law says we can't provide weapons to states that violate international law. And this is what Israel does on a daily basis. You want to be the commander in chief. You serve the American people. You don't serve the Israeli people. You serve the national security interests of the United States. You don't serve the national security interests of Israel. As I've pointed out, it's not just what happened in Beirut, Bobby. Maybe you want to take a look at the USS Liberty when Israel attacked us in 1967. Maybe you want to look at Jonathan Pollard and the spying he did against the United States, how Israel took his secrets and then traded them to our enemy, the Soviet Union, to get more Jewish immigrants out of the Soviet Union. That's not what a friend does, Bobby. Israel's not our friend. They're leading us down the wrong path, and you're being led down the wrong path. You want to be the candidate of peace. That's why I supported you. That's why I was on your side. But after just listening to you speak and listening to what you've said about Israel, you're the candidate of war. You're the candidate of genocide. You're the candidate we don't want to be president. Change your ways on Israel, Bobby, or you're going to lose this election.
Scott Ritter coming on strong as always. But Scott, I'm kind of torn. I'm in the middle here. I respect Bobby and his foreign policy is generally so on point, but you are too, and I respect you so much, and I know that you have an incredible level of experience and understanding of what you speak of. But I wanted to ask you, Scott. I think it was yesterday. I saw that you tweeted that I think you said you were endorsing Donald Trump instead in the presidential race. And I think that Trump's even, more pro-Israel than Bobby. He likes to brag that he's the most pro-Israel president in history. So I was wondering if you could tell me why. I'm curious. Why Trump?
Well, first of all, I didn't endorse Trump. What I did is said that if John Bolton is is worried that Trump is going to do things that upset Bolton and the establishment, I said maybe Trump's on the right path. But I'm under no illusions that Donald Trump is a candidate of peace. But I will say this: when Donald Trump was president, he did reach out to North Korea in a mold-breaking foreign policy initiative that, if implemented, could have led to the elimination of North Korea's nuclear weapons. That's another question I would have for Mr. Kennedy. What's your stance on Israel's nuclear program? What are you going to do to disarm that? Also, I just want to point out Iran didn't know anything about the October 7th attack. So to bring Iran in is to deny Hamas the credit for what they did. If you're going to condemn Hamas for October 7th, at least have the intellectual honesty to credit them for what they did. But I'm not saying that Trump is a candidate of peace. What I'm saying is Bobby has sold himself as a candidate of peace. And the Israeli policy, in my opinion, undercuts that. Right now, we're in a situation where if Joe Biden is the Democratic nominee, I'm for anybody but Joe Biden.
I heard that. Let me ask you this, Scott, since we're addressing this forum tonight as if we were speaking to Bobby, if he was in the room and we were talking to him. And I know he's consulted you before for your thoughts on things. Um, what would you advise him to do if he were president today? How to resolve this conflict without further bloodshed?
First thing is fire Shmuley Botek. Get rid of him. Dump him. He's not good for Bobby. He's not good for the campaign. He's not good for America. This is a far-right, pro-Israeli fanatic who espouses concepts of Eretz Israel. That's a greater Israel. Remember, from the river to the sea was a Likud um, party motto before it was a Hamas motto. Let's never forget that Benjamin Netanyahu and the Israeli government today support the concept of a greater Israel with no Palestinians in it. So fire him. And the next thing is, look, Bobby, you're not going to be able to come up with every policy solution right now. What you can say is you support an immediate ceasefire right now, right now, right now. You should condemn the Biden administration for its veto of the ceasefire effort that was put forward in the Security Council at the behest of the Secretary General of the United Nations, who for the first time in 70 years invoked Article 99 of the United Nations Charter. It is only done in extraordinary circumstances, and Gaza today is an extraordinary circumstance. Separate yourself from the pack, Bobby. Be the candidate of peace. I believe that people will forgive you what I will call the confusion of your position because of the tragedy that took place after October 7th. I can forgive that if you correct course and right now today come out and say an immediate ceasefire, a termination of this conflict, and be the candidate of peace, which means no more bombs. Negotiations. Live up to the promise and principles of your uncle, Bobby, and what he put forth in the American University address that you so eloquently drew upon in the early days of your candidacy. You call for a ceasefire, you call for an immediate end of this conflict, and you call for a negotiated termination. You call for a two-state solution, whatever, but be the candidate of peace, not war.
You know Bobby somewhat. Do you have any reason to believe that he would ever be a man of war?
Ask him. Flattening Mexico? He just implied that if he were the president of the United States and some sort of terror event took place in Mexico where they were coming in and trying to take Texas, that he could envision flattening Mexico. Bobby has a lot to explain here. He needs to stop buying into the Israeli rhetoric, the very aggressive rhetoric that dehumanizes the Palestinian people, thereby legitimizing these extreme militaristic actions that have slaughtered so many innocents, including thousands of children. The candidate of peace would never, ever tolerate this, ever. So, yeah, I think Bobby's gone off track here. The Israeli connection has confused him. He needs to refocus on being the American candidate of peace. And an American candidate of peace would be calling for a ceasefire right now.
I wanted to ask you, Scott, before we wrap up, something that Bobby said in that clip that we just played. You know, he referred to the Hamas charter, and that the charter, you know, says we must kill every Jew, not just every Jew in Israel, but every Jew in the world. How do you negotiate with an organization that's committed to the genocide of Jewish people? How do you talk to Hamas?
I don't know. How does Bobby talk to Israel today? Benjamin Netanyahu quoted the scripture. He spoke. He compared Hamas to Amalek. He compared them to people from the Old Testament who were slaughtered mercilessly by the Israelis. Every man, woman, and child, all their goats, all their cows, everything killed, put to the sword. That's what Netanyahu is saying. The Israeli soldiers today dance to songs about Amalek, about slaughtering the Palestinians. They say there is no difference between the citizens and Hamas. This is Israeli soldiers singing this, chanting this, and yet Bobby seems fit to talk to them. So, yeah, I'm not going to sit here and endorse Hamas's charter. I will say that Hamas is representing the people who have been occupied by Israel illegally for 70 plus years. That if Israel were to put or participate, speak of a process that could create a legitimate Palestinian state where the rights of the Palestinians were respected in accordance with international law, that you might be able to soften the Hamas position. But it's very difficult to talk about softening the Hamas position when Israel is carrying out what the equivalent of mass genocide. And here's the other thing. It doesn't matter what Hamas's position is. No matter what Hamas's position is, you don't commit genocide. You don't engage in violations of international law. You don't carry out war crimes. That's the thing. It's not what they do, it's what you do. Bobby wants to be the American president, which means that under no circumstances could he allow the American military to operate the way the Israeli military is operating today against the Palestinians, against Hamas in Gaza.
You know, I hate to see these airstrikes because I'm pro-humanity. I'm not for either side in this conflict. It seems to me both sides want to genocide the other. That's just my take. I don't speak for Mr. Kennedy. I can't speak for Mr. Kennedy, and I don't speak for the campaign. But I'll go with his comments of what he just said there about, and I think it's a valid point that he makes. And I wanted to ask you about it, Scott, because they are doing these terrible airstrikes. I think it's a valid point to raise that Hamas has received billions in humanitarian aid from the international community. And of course, Hamas knew when they invaded Israel on October the 7th that Israel was going to retaliate big time, right? Just based on past behavior, they could expect that Gaza was going to be flattened with airstrikes. And yet, they did not build proper bomb shelters to protect their civilian population. Hamas is the elected government of Gaza, and yet they did not provide protection. And, you know, they say, at least Israel says, that they're doing that on purpose, that that's how they raise funds from the international community, is they play on our sympathies. They show us images of civilians dying, of children dying, and everybody opens their pocketbook and sends them money. And then the leaders of Hamas abscond with those funds, live a lavish lifestyle in Qatar in mansions with armed guards, while the people of Gaza suffer and die. How would you respond to Bobby's argument there?
Two things. First of all, just to bring up a little historical context. In the lead up to D-Day, June 6, 1944, the American and British component of the alliance talked to Charles de Gaulle, who was the head of the Free French, and said, in the process of liberating Normandy, we will be killing a tremendous number of French civilians. And that number at that time was speculated between 80 and 120,000 dead. It shocked de Gaulle. And yet he green-lighted the invasion. It turned out that we only killed 20 to 60,000 civilians. De Gaulle didn't participate in any D-Day anniversaries after that because of the sickening cost. But as he said, it's the price that had to be paid for freedom. Now, let me ask you this. On October 6th, who in the world was seriously pursuing a two-state solution for the Palestinian people? And the answer is nobody. Nobody was talking about it. It was done. The Abrams Accord were kicking in. Israel was ready to close on its final leg, which was normalization with Saudi Arabia, and there would be no hope ever of a Palestinian state on October 6th. After October 7th, a two-state solution is on the tip of everybody's tongue. It's there not because Israel said, hey, we want to have that. They didn't. The Netanyahu government was dead set against it. It's there because of what Hamas did. So we need to keep that in mind, that the price being paid by the Palestinian people is the price necessary for the freedom of Palestine, the potential of Palestinian state. Thousands of Palestinians were held prisoner by Israel. On October 6th, who in the world was saying, Israel, you must release these prisoners, many of them innocents, held without charge, without due process, tortured. You must release them. Nobody was saying that. After October 7th, the release of these prisoners became part of the negotiation because Hamas took hostages and held those hostages as a negotiating chip. Now, I'm not a big fan of taking hostages, but when you have no other choice, that's the tactic you do. What I'm trying to say is Hamas achieved two victories. Three, Al-Aqsa Mosque is being desecrated. The third holiest shrine in in Islam, is being desecrated by the Israelis. It's been desecrated for years. And under Netanyahu, they've been ramping it up. They've been tear gassing worshipers. They've been beating up women, beating up men, going inside the third holiest shrine in Islam to terrorize the worshipers. Because of Al-Aqsa flood, which is the name of the Hamas attack, the entire Islamic world is united in defense of the Al-Aqsa Mosque. These are three big victories for Hamas that couldn't have taken place without October 7th. And they couldn't have taken place if Israel didn't behave the way Hamas knew they were going to behave. You play the cards that you have. Hamas has very few weapons that can turn international opinion around except their own civilians. Is it cynical? Absolutely. Is it brutal? Absolutely. But look what Hamas has accomplished. Today, millions of people are in the streets around the world. They're not protesting Hamas. They're protesting Israel. And they're protesting Israel because Israel killed the Palestinian civilians. Hamas did not kill them. Israel killed them with the Dahiyah doctrine, the Habsara, gospel AI generated targeting that specifically says every time we drop a bomb on a building, we know exactly how many civilians are going to die. It is a violation of international law. It is immoral. And this is why Hamas is prevailing right now. I'm not saying that I would go the same route. I'm an American who believes in the sanctity of life. But what I am saying is, what other choice did Hamas have? Because had Israel concluded the normalization with Saudi Arabia, there would never be a Palestinian state. Bobby, answer that question. How do you envision the creation of a Palestinian state? How would you envision it prior to October 7th? And how do you envision it today? And I'll tell you, it's two totally different paths. Because on October 6th, there was no path. Today, there is a path, and it's only because of what Hamas did.
In your rebuttal, Scott, you said that, of course, Israel is violating international law. But, you know, taking hostages is also a violation of international law. And I know you're not a fan of it. Obviously, I'm not either. You and I are both old enough to remember the 444-day Iranian hostage crisis of 1979, 1980. But just to kind of play Kennedy's advocate here, you know, he said in his remarks that Israel is not targeting civilians and that there's always lots of warning given on any civilian targets, that they drop leaflets, that they, you know, send out warnings in advance. And that kind of brings me back to my original question about the bomb shelters and why, if you have any ideas on that, why wouldn't Hamas at least provide that most basic level of protection the way that England did during the Blitz, the way that countries around the world still provide for their citizens to this day? And as you know, Israel has an amazing system of bomb shelters for their civilian population. Do you have any response to that?
Certainly, because Hamas is not obligated to do so. Israel is an illegal occupying entity. Hamas is an occupied entity. And under international law, Israel has no inherent right of self-defense, which means that Israel can't say Hamas attacked us, therefore we must respond. They have no right. That's, again, the 2004 opinion published by the International Court of Justice. That is the supreme body of international lawmaking in the world today. So why do I have to build a bomb shelter to protect me against an attack that should never be allowed to happen? Israel has no inherent right to strike me. So Israel striking me is a violation of international law. And again, if I'm a Hamas politician, a Hamas strategic thinker, I gain more by letting Israel violate the law. I get the world on my side. It is brutal. It is cynical, but it's very, very effective. But and the other thing I have to say, Bobby sort of contradicted him. They make phone calls. Well, the phone service is out, so they don't make phone calls, Bobby. You know that. They drop leaflets. Wow, Bobby, you know that that's a violation of international law. You cannot mass displace people from their land under threat of violence. It's against the law, Bobby. You're an American president, not an Israeli advocate. You advocate for American principles. We don't support that. We can't support that. We will never support that, Bobby. And you should never support it if you want to be my leader. Yes, Hamas is doing things that cause all of us to get white-knuckled, but they're doing it because for 75 years, the Palestinian people have been brutally occupied, and I mean brutally occupied by an illegal Israeli occupying authority, and they are resisting this. They are resisting this like the Americans resisted the British tyranny, like other nations have resisted tyranny. Hamas is the governing body and the military arm of the Palestinian people in Gaza, and they are resisting a brutal Israeli occupier, which is not linked to America either morally, ethically, legally. Israel is its own separate entity, and Bobby needs to distance himself from that so he can have a more balanced perspective.
Scott Ritter, thank you so much for joining our panel. I always love to hear from you. You always give me so much to think about. I think you've given Bobby lots to think about, and I know he respects your opinion and will definitely hear you out. I hope you can stick around in case some of our speakers might have questions for you, if you can hang out for a little while. And I wanted to give, you know, here at the top of the hour, we're going into our second hour. And as a rebuttal to Scott, I thought it would be interesting to bring up Alex Jones. Scott Ritter's been a guest on the Alex Jones show many times through the years. As we all know, Alex Jones was banned from this platform for several years. And Elon Musk just reinstated his account yesterday. And Alex Jones, of course, strongly supports Israel. So as a sort of rebuttal to Scott, Alex couldn't be here himself. So I'm just going to play you a quick clip of what Alex has to say about why he supports Israel. Take a listen.
I've had the Islamicist groups, I've had the white supremacists, I've had the Hollywood crowd, I've had mainstream media bully me for 20 plus years that I've been on air with litmus test about, do I support Israel or don't I? And I've been very, very clear that I do support Israel. There's videos on YouTube that have been re-uploaded where I said that in 1997.
What I wanted to say is this. I want to say this out in the open. I support the Jewish state of Israel. They have been in that land. That is their land.
And then I would just get bullied online and by leftist publications going, Jones hates Muslims. Jones is a racist. Jones is probably on the payroll of Israel. Never been to Israel. And then I've got all these people bullying me constantly, saying I'm an Israeli agent when I have absolutely never been to Israel. And it was actually their bullying trying to make me be anti-Israel that made me study it more and become pro-Israel. So good luck with all of that bullying that's gone on. Accept our ideology or you're a Israeli shill. Accept our ideology, and all these groups want to bully you that we're going to call you this big power name. We're going to call you an Israeli shill that supposedly has all this power if you don't do what we want. Well, then I am an Israeli shill. There you go. It's not true, never been to Israel, but if it makes you feel powerful, if that takes your power word away, I'll do it. I'm sick of the bullying out there to get on some bandwagon against Israel. People are like, you Zionist filth. This is fake Zionist stuff. You're on the frickin' Zionist payroll. And I just want to say to you people, okay, I am. Okay, I'm on Zionist payroll. I'm just sick of everyone being obsessed over Israel and acting like they actually are the dominant factor. You look at the globalists and the Islamicists, they're the new game in town. They're the new boss. You move aside, Israel. I know, you used to talk about how powerful the Muslims were, and I didn't believe it, but behind the scenes, they run the Federal Reserve, you name it, they're really coming after us. Now, the communist Chinese basically run this country in the last 20 years until Trump showed up. And so the communist Chinese are being evicted. Quite frankly, I'm sick of the obsession with Israel. I mean, I just don't get how there's this right-wing thing, particularly on the fringe of the right wing, that just hates Israel and then just ascribes to it magical powers. And they just use Israel as a political football, like a voodoo doll that all the evil in the world's heaped on, while meanwhile the UN's running around colonizing countries all over for corporations, murdering entire villages on a daily basis. Just an excuse to point your finger all day long and say Israel's the problem if you fall on a damn banana peel. And I'm not here kissing the ass of Israel. Okay, and then if somebody falls on a banana peel, Jews did it. If somebody falls on a banana peel, a Jew did it. I mean, it gets a little old. It's a big cause celeb, not just with liberals, but with a lot of so-called conservatives, to obsess over Israel, to hate Israel, and to want to destroy Israel. And there's a lot of weird globalist propaganda as a litmus test to hate Israel. I'm just not into the whole cause celeb thing for Palestine. I've been bullied and brainwashed my whole life about it. It's like Israel's the one trendy thing you bitch about it, and no matter what else you do, it's okay. And a lot of people out there have been brainwashed into just obsessing on Israel all day and hating Israel, and it's quite frankly shameful, because you're not intellectuals. All you know how to do is say Zionist, 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 until I want to throw up. This obsession by all these losers with Israel, and it's just all a load of crap. You've got Funyuns and Hot Pockets in mommy's basement and have learned the word Jew and can say it over and over again like a magic word. The extreme right wing's magic word is Jew or Zionist, and all I hear about all day is Israel, 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 Israel. Israel runs everything. Israel put me in charge. Israel wipes my butt in the morning. No, Israel doesn't. But I just don't want to hear Israel bashed anymore. I don't even want to hear the debate or the discussion, because it's them trying to set the parameters of the debate with this obsession on Israel all day. I'm sick of it. I'm sick of hearing about Israel. I'm tired of it. And so I want to go to David Horowitz now, because I want to just say proudly I agree with 95% of what he's saying, and that I just am proud for all the anti-Semites and the Islamicists and everybody else who've been trying to bully me and tell me what to do and make up crap all these years. What you've said I am is now coming true, because I support Israel's right to exist. And Israel, when it does something, has a crooked toenail. It's the biggest thing in the world. And everybody else is okay. Israel's not going anywhere. They got nuclear weapons, and they're not our enemy. Leave them alone.
They're not our enemy.
Leave them alone.
So that's Alex Jones. I thought that was kind of funny, guys. I wanted to share that with you. And I'm sure that, I can kind of relate to that. Bobby probably can too. I bet Scott Ritter can. Scott, you used to support Israel for years and years, and people used to call you an Israeli Zionist shill and a propagandist for Israel and all that. And now you're probably, are you being labeled now as some kind of anti Semite because you now criticize Israel's foreign policy?
Oh, there's no doubt that there's a group of people out there that that make that claim. I don't care. I mean, I was pro-Israel because look, and I've said this before. When I went to Israel, I was singularly focused on the task of eliminating Iraq's weapons of mass destruction, and my mission was to coordinate with Israeli intelligence so that I could learn what they knew and investigate it to make sure that if we ever were able to close the book on Iraq's weapons, that Israel didn't have some secret cache of intelligence that could undermine our efforts. I wanted to be 100% certain. But when you work that closely with people, and I worked with them from 1994 to 1998, very closely, you get to know them very well. And the Israel that I knew was led by a man named Yitzhak Rabin, the man who came up with Oslo One, Oslo Two. I thought that was pretty cool. He called himself a man of peace. He said he was willing to die in the cause of peace, and he was murdered by a far right wing Israeli Jew um, who said he took his orders from a rabbi who was a loyalist to Benjamin Netanyahu. The rabbi quoted Talmud scripture calling Netanyahu or calling Yitzhak Rabin a betrayer of the Jewish faith. He did that in front of Netanyahu. Netanyahu did nothing to stop it, and Amir, the assassin, murdered Yitzhak Rabin after he gave a wonderful speech in the cause of peace. That's the Israel that I fell in love with. I see no um, there's no resemblance in the Israel of today with that Israel. It has gone so far off track. But I was somebody who, at one time, defended Israel's right to exist. I still do defend Israel's right to exist. I'm not supporting the elimination of Israel, but I will support the defeat of Eretz Israel, the greater Israel that Netanyahu and the Likud speak of. I will oppose any policy that seeks to deny the Palestinian people the right to a homeland equal in status to that of Israel, a genuine true two-state solution. This is what Yitzhak Rabin was working for. That's the Israel I supported. Netanyahu's Israel is so far removed from that reality that I cannot support it, and that's why I've taken the stance that I have.
Great answer. Great answer. Thank you, Scott. I'd like to bring Christina Tobin back in. Christina, did you have any thoughts on Bobby's foreign policy on Israel or Scott's rebuttal? What are your thoughts?
It's being in a position of moderating and co-hosting hosting a presidential debate this February 29th that Robert F. Kennedy Jr., I think it's very likely he'll be one of the top 6 candidates voted into it. It puts me in a situation to be really across the board fair, free, and equal. But it is important when you say that you're a peace candidate to abide by that way. And that's my conscience as an individual speaking, separate from the hat of free and equal elections. What I can say is that over a year ago, I met with Bobby Kennedy and at his home, and for several hours at that time, he wanted to endorse free and equal elections. And I came over with my production team. And right before the shoot, he said, "I don't think I can do this. I'm a lifelong Democrat, Christina. I cannot support an independent movement." And so we sat and had a plate of spaghetti, and we talked after that. And I said, "Well, Bobby, I have the production team here, and what change? Why are you thinking differently?" And he said, "I'm a lifelong Democrat." And I said, "Well, Bobby, is the Democratic Party representing you, or is it representing the military industrial complex, the pharmaceutical industry, so on and so on?" He said, let me take a moment here. And he went into the other room for about 20 minutes. And he came in and said, "The Democratic Party does not represent the people. You're right, Christina. I'm going to endorse free and equal elections." I said, "I understand." This is before I knew he was going to run for president. But when he ran and declared as a Democrat, I knew in my heart that he would come around and realize and know in his mind he would do everything he could to try to prevail as a Democratic candidate, but if not, by him endorsing free and equal elections, really told me that it was very likely and inevitable that he would run as an independent. So what I'm getting at is that I saw Bobby in his moments and analytical, thinking things out and rationale, change his mind and do the right thing. And so I'm hopeful that a conversation like this today, I will personally message it to Bobby. I consider him a friend, and I look forward to hearing so much from everybody on this Twitter space. I don't want to take up too much more time. My role as a moderator, I love listening and learning. Scott Ritter, it was great to hear your knowledge, and I'm excited to hear the rest of the people on this Twitter space. So thank you, Lori, for the moment.
You're awesome, Christina, and you're also helping out tonight by keeping time. We're about to open the floor and do an open mic. I want to hear from all of you, your thoughts on Bobby's foreign policy that you just heard him outline, or Scott's rebuttal. If there's anything that you want to say to Scott, he's going to hang out for a little while. And if you have questions for him, we can take your questions. So we're going to give everybody 3 minutes because we've got a whole lot of people lined up in the queue that want to speak. Just in the interest of time, we're going to ask you to limit your comments to 3 minutes. And we're going to set the timer when you start speaking. If you go over time, you might hear this little tick tock, or we might give you the bell to let you know your time's up. And if you go way over time or get crazy, you might hear this. You might get the buzzer. So on that note, who do we want to add first, Christina? You see somebody you want to pick?
Well, I wanted to have Craig Tarjula, the couch of Jimmy Dore, but he's chilling right now and listening. But I'd love to have him on, Craig.
Come on up, Craig.
I mean, you're the most knowledgeable and very passionate about this topic. So, no, I definitely want to have Greg here from the Bolden from Host of America. I would love to have him speak.
Excellent. Yeah, I just sent Craig a speaker request if he'd like to join the panel. And how about Liberty? I see Liberty's had his hand up for a while. I frequently co-host with Liberty. He does great spaces here on Twitter. Let's start with you, Liberty.
And Donnie as well. Yeah, go ahead.
Lori, Christina, Scott, thank you very much. It's been a really interesting time to listen and definitely triggered some emotions back and forth. But I think I will stand with one conclusion. Sometimes there are no good guys. There's just the evils of war. And I think that throughout history, countries, empires have had a time where they're going to just take territory and the resources and the spoils of war. And it doesn't matter what country or citizenry that we put on one side or the other, there's still victims. There's still people that are dying and being in harm's way. And so as much as I think Scott was frustrated with Bobby, I got frustrated with Scott, and I realized something. We're just frustrated with war, and we just want that to end. And I think this, Scott, about Bobby, he changed his mind on the border. And Bobby, if you're listening to this, I hope that you will re-examine and look for peace and not take sides on this conflict or any other. It's interesting to me, and I would like to hear this, and my question to Scott, and I hope he maybe has some answers for me. I constantly wonder why 10/7 happened when it seemed convenient to me, because all of a sudden the Ukraine-Russia war was very unpopular with people who are ardent supporters of it here in the United States. And I wonder if there's some malicious timing there. I think Bobby might have even alluded to it. I don't have a resource on that, so I'm sorry. I should have had that, but I forgot. It's just kind of a spontaneous thing. I really want us to find a way to break the military-industrial complex, which I think is what Scott really is pushing towards, and what I think most Bobby supporters are pushing towards. We're done with this. We don't want endless war. We want to look and figure out ways to figure out how to help each other and be able to live our best lives. So I'll leave you with that thought. How do we get there? Because I don't know if there is a good guy or a right or wrong answer in Israel and Palestine, because listen, those religions have been fighting for a long time. I'm sorry. They just have, way before that.
Amen to that.
So I just want peace. So that's what I'll throw out there, Lori. I know it's not one side or the other, but I just think there's a bigger picture, and I think there's a lot of smart people and a lot of people in this audience that are probably going to contribute to this. But I would just ask everybody that talks or rebuts me to think about, how do we get humanity to peace? Because it doesn't matter what countries are fighting. There are women, children, and innocent men, young boys, young girls that are going to turn into people who wanted to commit violence because violence was committed upon them. And if we can end that violence, maybe we break that cycle. Thank you. Appreciate you, Lori.
Brilliant. Brilliant. Yeah, appreciate you too, my friend. I'd like to bring in Greg Bolden. I think Greg is on kind of a tight schedule and can't stay long. He's the host of America Emboldened podcast. Greg, welcome to the show. And you got 3 minutes. We're just setting the timer and go.
Thank you, Lori. Thank you, Christina. Thanks for hosting this space. It's been excellent so far. So my question for Mr. Kennedy would be a statement and then what I would like to ask him on my show. America right now needs a president that can strengthen our country within our borders. We're currently in need direly of a domestically focused leader. And my concerns with the comments that I listened to tonight and on the podcast a couple days ago on PPD was it was a historical lesson, but I'm not quite sure I understand at the end the role that Mr. Kennedy believes that we should be playing in this conflict. And that's what's important. Because if we look back at the documents, we can see that if you understand why people attacked the United States in a post 9/11 world, it wasn't because terrorists hated us for our freedom. It was because of blowback. They hated our country for intervention and bombing in their own land. The Department of Defense has commented on this before. The State Department has commented on this. It normally is a result of our covert or our direct actions. And right now, we are in the middle of the United States being involved once again in a covert as well as direct action in Israel. We have the Mediterranean Sea filled with our Navy fleet. So one can support Israel and or Palestine, but they can also support a non-interventional policy. And so there are two questions the American public, I believe, once answered. Are you a candidate of more war, or are you a candidate of strength through peace? And there's also a reality here that needs honest feedback from Mr. Kennedy. How much do we need Israel for stability in the Middle East? And how much of our support is because there is an energy sector that's tied to that? America needs to know, will you sell out American interest for a power move in the Middle East? The current administration is continuing proxy wars in the Ukraine and now in Israel. Our national debt's continuing to climb. Inflation has condemned our citizens here to lower quality of life. Our borders are wide open. Major cities are losing funding to support the illegal immigrants. Just look at New York City right now. And socialists are now openly stating their intentions for America. And even worse, they're being elected. So what would you do, Mr. Kennedy, to support the Constitution, to put America first, and be a strength through peace president? And that would be my question. And thank you for allowing me to ask that tonight of him.
Really, really good stuff. Thanks, Greg. Appreciate
Thank you.
I'd love to bring in my friend Patrick Henningsen. I know that, well, we've done a couple of shows together now. And Patrick, I'm so glad that you could make it. If you could sit down and talk to Mr. Kennedy about this very important foreign policy issue in this war, what would you tell him?
Hey, Lori, how you doing? Thanks for the mic. It's a long conversation that I would have with him because I don't think I can, get the substance of the conversation across in a couple of minutes. But suffice to say, I'm a political realist as well, so I understand what American politics requires in order to run for national office, and I know support for Israel is required. It's not really optional. So that's one thing. But someone like Robert F. Kennedy has the transformative ability to break some of these institutional cycles. I think he's proven that he has the capability to do that. But on this very important issue, and the timing is somewhat uncanny, that we're seeing what we're seeing right now happening in the world and in Gaza, and to basically have him kind of removed from the debate essentially, which I think is quite extraordinary. And foreign policy is a very important part of the United States president for the office, for the campaign. It's more important than in many ways than a lot of domestic issues. And while Bobby Kennedy had carved out a very good niche, I think, on domestic issues, beginning with the health freedom issue, vaccine mandates, and so forth, going into this. He had great potential on a number of other issues. I was very much flirting with the idea of voting for him if he was running on the Democratic ticket, because I think it could have been, consequential. I liked what he was saying about Ukraine, what he said about Syria, pulling our U.S. illegal occupation of Syria, stopping that. So, he ticked a lot of boxes for a lot of people. And then all of a sudden, it seemed like he was somewhat captured by the Israeli lobby in May and June, so starting from the spring. And he was sort of, in a way, set upon by people like Rabbi Shmuley Botish, who, if people aren't familiar with Shmuley, I would say, just from an objective point of view, I'd say he was the Al Sharpton of the Israeli lobby, if you will. Plays a similar role traditionally, and once he was attached and then draped in the Israeli flag, he really can't be seen to be neutral or be an honest broker of that situation. And if any U.S. candidate who's coming in who wants who grab a good percentage of the anti-war vote or the independent vote, they have to have a baseline, and the baseline in this case would be international law, and at least the recognition of multiple UN resolutions. I mean, that's from the United States doesn't exist in a vacuum. So, for a Democrat or a liberal, especially, I would expect that they would look at international law and precedent UN resolutions, and that would be the baseline for where to begin diplomacy. But like what we're seeing with the current administration, led by Antony Blinken, arguably Joe Biden's not involved in a lot of day-to-day decision making or policy making, but let's just say, okay, he is, for argument's sake. This administration and then the Republicans are, fighting over each other to see who can be more hawkish in support of Israel. And so that means it precludes all diplomacy, any negotiations for a ceasefire. Even Bernie Sanders has caved in, predictably, on this issue of a ceasefire, as have so many in Washington. So that doesn't give us a lot of hope from Robert F. Kennedy Jr. that he'd be any closer to resolving this type of dispute. And me as an American voter, that's what I would be looking for. I'd be looking to the sort of Spartan effort that we've seen from previous administrations, at least to try to get a meaningful settlement. And I see a total abandonment of that, totally siding with one side, and who happens to be the side that's in violation of multiple UN resolutions against it, and the majority of the world, quite frankly. So I think Robert F. Kennedy disappointingly sided with power, like so many people do. The question is, why did he side with power? Did he do so out of fear, or to feel that there was a benefit that would protect his campaign to a certain degree, or is there other extenuating issues, some of which were brought up earlier this week, which I think are, completely plausible, if you guys know what I'm talking about. So let's be realistic about it. So this position of no ceasefire, no diplomacy, keep killing civilians, let's level the entirety of Gaza in order to supposedly get terrorists. Thank you for the bell. This isn't really a tenable alternative from a credible independent candidate. That's not what I'm looking for a transformative candidate. And the same would go for Tulsi Gabbard if he chose her as his running mate. She's also sided 100% in the Israeli camp. So she's no longer an anti-war leading politician voice in America either. So extremely disappointed. And I have not seen any real articulation of why he's taken such a one-sided approach. I just see a lot of fear there when the issue is broached. That's what I see, being completely honest, watching previous U.S. presidential campaigns over the years since Jimmy Carter till now. So that's my initial thoughts.
Really good, really good points you bring up there. The issue of neutrality, I agree with you on that, by the way, Patrick. That when earlier this year, when Bobby was making comments about Vladimir Putin, calling him a gangster, calling him a thug, I objected to that. I said it's not diplomatic language. I want to hear the future president of the United States as more of a mediator, as a negotiator, and you have to show respect to both sides. And so I think that's actually an excellent point that you raised in terms of looking presidential. And yet, of course, every candidate in this race and in any war is always expected to pick a side, right? They have to declare their position and support one side or the other. Every candidate's expected to do that. And of course, Bobby made his position very clear on October 7th, on the day that all this began, when he put out that tweet, saying that this was an unprovoked attack and that Israel deserved all the support that the United States could give. And of course, it has been our national foreign policy since 1948, probably unlikely to change in the near
It
future.
hasn't actually been since 1948. There's been huge shifts in U.S. policy towards Israel from successive administrations, but it solidified I would say, after 1967. I will correct you, Lori. When Donald Trump ran for president, if you remember the Republican debate, if my memory serves me correctly, it was either late November or early December 2015. Donald Trump was asked about the Israel-Palestine question by the debate moderator, and he says, I'm not taking a side. I want to see peace. I think I can negotiate a peaceful settlement. And he didn't favor either side in that statement. And he was summoned to meet Sheldon Adelson very soon after that. And then Donald Trump's position changed radically on Israel. That's just a fact. So Donald Trump candidate Trump attempted to play that negotiator, to take a neutral position and be that peacemaker that America and the world needs so badly, but then was the kibosh, to borrow a Yiddish term, the kibosh was put on him after that. And so unfortunately, that's just the way it went.
Yep, I remember it well. And then Trump went to the APAC conference and said, I'm going to be the most pro Israel president ever. And he delivered. He delivered for Israel. So I'm going to go to Johnny Paradise. He's had his hand up for a while. Good evening, Johnny, my friend. How are you?
Hey, I'm great, Lori. Thanks for having this space. Really appreciate it. Thanks for co-hosting, Christina. Scott, I really appreciate your podcast you did with Bobby, where you guys spoke about how Ukraine is just a giant money laundering scheme, and how you guys were calling out the NATO encroachment there. And yeah, I was a little surprised, after hearing that. I really see Bobby as a candidate of peace. This attack that happened on the 7th, it was the worst attack since the Holocaust, for Jewish people. And you mentioned, flattening Mexico. When 9/11 happened, 1 million people died in Iraq with that war. And we weren't even going after the terrorists there. That was just finishing up business from a decade before that. So, I think Bobby would be the one as president to show restraint and not go flatten Mexico as others might. I'll go back to this idea of what does Palestine want? They've rejected a two-state solution again and again. 1947, again at Camp David in the year 2000, again in 2003, again in 2008. Bobby made a great point about, the fresh water there, the irrigation pipes being turned into rockets. And you made the point about gasoline not going for the rockets. But whether it's gasoline for propelling the rockets or sugar and fertilizer, it's the same tension. The gasoline, the fertilizer, the sugar is being used for war rather than the wellness of the Gaza people. On October 7th, 1,000 Israeli lives were lost. And since then, 10,000 rockets have been fired into Israel. Hundreds of Israeli hostages have been taken. How long can we expect them to sit on their hands? What response do you want? Do you want them to sacrifice hundreds more Israeli lives going into those tunnels? There is always collateral damage in war, and it's terrible. Everyone, they're fond of accusing Israel of genocide. Well, Hamas is literally calling for the genocide of not just Israelis in Israel, but throughout the world. And, it wasn't too long ago, 6 of 9 million Jews in Europe were wiped out. Now, if you're in charge in Israel and it's your family members that, are getting taken out on 7th and being held hostage, if you go and negotiate, you embolden them. So, there's no easy answers. I just appreciate everybody sharing tonight. I really, it's a thorny issue, and there's no easy answers. Appreciate the chance to share.
That was excellent, really well articulated. Thank you so much. And before you go, you had a clip that you wanted to play of Robert F. Kennedy Jr. speaking. I believe this was an interview he did just this week with Sirius XM Radio, right? You were there.
Yeah, that was right. Yeah, I got to be there. I was pretty lucky. I got to ask a question on regenerative agriculture and get a great answer from Bobby. And then the very next answer was this one about the conflict there. So yeah, I'll give that a play.
Thank you. Curious to hear this. I haven't heard it yet.
Palestinians and Israelis, as well as highlighted the ongoing conflict the USA has had with Iran. Despite the USA decimating the Iranian Navy in the one-day war of 2008, Iranian intransigence and support of terror has continued in an uninterrupted fashion. More recently, there's a loose alliance backing with Iran by China and Russia. Would you share your thoughts regarding this Iranian conflict and your ideas regarding resolution?
Yeah, I mean, Iran gives Iran is the principal financer of Hamas, and it directs Hamas. And Hamas is a criminal organization. The principal leader of Hamas, Ismail Haniyeh, has $5 billion net worth. His two cohorts collectively, they have $11 billion that they've stolen from the people of Gaza, and the West Bank is not much better. West Bank, where Islamic Jihad and Hamas are in the West Bank, they're also funded by Iran. The international aid agencies have given more money to the Palestinian people than any people in the world, and yet none of it gets to them. It goes to buying weapons and to enriching their leadership. And Yasser Arafat died a billionaire. His wife, who lives in France, is a billionaire. His successor, Mahmoud Abbas, is a billionaire. His sons have $750 million. Oh, it's an organized crime syndicate that schools their children to kill Jews. The charter of Hamas says in the charter, it says that the single purpose of Hamas is the annihilation of Israel and the genocide, not of every Jew in Israel, but every Jew in the world. And that it is a violation of Islam to even negotiate with Israel, except as a ruse. This is what it says in their charter, which I've read. Oh, and Hamas is driven and funded by Iran, as is Hezbollah in Lebanon, as are the Houthis in Yemen, and all of these conflicts are connected to that. And I was among the strongest voices of protest when President Biden authorized the $2.6 billion transfer of wealth from Egypt and Qatar, and then $6 billion after that. And the fact that President Biden failed to enforce the sanctions against Iran, which bring in now $65 billion a year and allow them the money to fund these jihadi terror organizations. And I have great sympathy for the Palestinian people. I have many Palestinian friends. Cheryl and I, my wife, who's in this audience today, have visited the West Bank. We have met with the top leadership. We've eaten at the dinner table with Palestinian shepherds and business people. I have a friend who is in South Gaza today with 5 children. I sent him money to his bank yesterday. And, I'm deeply concerned with the impacts of civilians on the West Bank, but I don't think Israel has any choice. I think that you cannot, Hamas, as they took over, Israel walked out of Gaza. It's not occupied territory. Israel walked out of it in 2005. Hamas took over in 2006, rounded up the Palestinian leadership, the Palestinian Authority leadership, shot them through the kneecaps, brought them up to the highest buildings in Gaza and threw them off the roof, and then declared war on Israel and began firing rockets at Israel. And between 2006 at the takeover and October 7th, they fired 30,000 rockets at Israel. There's no other country in the world that would tolerate that. What did Israel do? Instead of going in there and removing them, they didn't want to go in. So they built the Iron Dome with our help so that they wouldn't have to go in. And every time that Hamas fires a rocket at civilians in Israel, instead of going in there, shoots the rocket down. It costs Hamas $800 to fire that rocket and build it. It costs Israel $40,000 to shut it down. But they put up with that because they didn't want to go in there. But the October 7th invasion, where 3,000 people came across the border, where they disabled the fences, the automatic machine guns, the surveillance system on the fences, and showed now the capacity. They've got 40,000 troops there living in tunnels. And they which they don't shelter their own population, by the way. They put the soldiers in and protect them and then use the civilians as civilian shields. Oh, if Mexico suddenly elected a communist government and said, now we're going to take back Texas, and started firing, missiles onto Houston and San Antonio, we would go in there and we wouldn't wait 30 years or 16 years. We would go in immediately. And, I don't see that Israel has a choice.
Bobby, we have time.
That's the clip, right? That all?
That's it.
Great. Thanks, Johnny. We've got like 36 people asking to speak. So there are only so many people that are allowed in the speakers panel by Twitter at one time. So if you've already spoken, I'm going to ask that you drop back down to listener status so that I can add more speakers to the panel, or we'll take you out after you've spoken. And that makes room for the next speaker, who I believe is Jay Scott, my good friend Jay Scott, host of the Jay Scott Ascension podcast. Good evening, Jay. How you doing, my friend?
Hey, good evening, Lori. Thanks so much for having me on and for hosting this really important topic that I know has been causing a lot of division within the campaign and beyond. So I'd like to address this to Mr. Kennedy. I'm a half Ashkenazi, person myself. So this issue is pretty close to my heart since, the whole reason behind the conflict is being used by a lot of people, who come from my lineage. So, just to give everyone a little back. Muslims and Christians.
Oh, you're cutting out a little bit, Jay.
Sorry. Can you hear me better now? Hello?
Yeah, try that.
Okay, perfect. So before Ashkenazi Jewish driven Zionism, the worst violence against.
I think we're.
Sorry.
I'm sorry, Jay. I think maybe a bad cell phone reception or something right now, or it could be the space glitching. You might try dropping down to listener status, and I'll bring you back up as a speaker, and we'll cycle back to you after the next speaker. Okay.
Okay. I don't know if this is better. Can you hear me now? I just connected to my my data instead of my Wi-Fi. Is this better?
That does sound clearer. Yeah.
That is better.
Give it another try.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah, go ahead.
Perfect. Sorry about that. So really quickly, before Ashkenazi Jewish driven Zionism, Arab Jews, Muslims, and Christians all lived together relatively peacefully. The worst violence against Jews was actually happening in Europe by Bush-funded Hitler in Germany, Nazi factions in Ukraine, and other ethno-fascists across Europe. But Mr. Kennedy and everyone listening to this podcast should go onto Google right now and look up Haifa, the city Haifa, before 1948, and you'll see a thriving, growing Palestinian civilization just hitting its growth stride. This is where Jews, Arabs, and Christians of Arab descent all live together peacefully. So just to give everyone some background on why I think we're seeing this stance, JFK was actually threatened to withhold all aid to Israel unless they let U.S. nuke inspectors into the country, and the public didn't find out about this until long after his assassination, as it was kept secret at the time. Known Zionist Jacob Rubinstein assassinated Lee Harvey Oswald before he could explain he was set up as a patsy in the JFK assassination, and the business council that brought JFK to Dallas that day he was killed was comprised of largely Zionists. So shortly after being sworn in as president, his follower, his vice president at the time, Johnson, who took office after him, reportedly remarked to an Israeli diplomat, a direct quote, "You have lost a very great friend, but you have found a better one." And I've actually posted the quote in the comments below this space. RFK, his brother and Bobby's father, threatened to reopen the investigation upon election. And although a Palestinian Christian supposedly killed him, his assassination has been promoted from the time it happened as the first example of Muslim jihad to begin a narrative of dehumanizing Arabs to excuse their genocide and establish a good versus evil polarizing dynamic, the same dynamic we have today. A few months before RFK was assassinated in 1968, secret documents were released later on, in 1998, that show that in 1968, Mossad had just tried a failed assassination attempt on Yasser Arafat with a hypnotized assassin. I've also posted more evidence to this in the chat. And these documents were the same year RFK died. So most people who look into the assassination, the RFK assassination, formed the opinion that Sirhan could have been also a victim of hypnotized, assassination. So, former Congressman James Traficant died September 27th, 2014, shortly after he criticized Israel's policy. In the clip you played, Mr. Kennedy, you did not respond to the overlap the interviewer asked regarding what happened on 9/11 and October 7th. They were both attacks perpetrated by the same terrorist entities our respective countries have been caught funding and propping up as an excuse to escalate tensions and rape resources in the region. So, Mr. Kennedy, I care deeply about your safety, and the history of your uncle shows it's possible for a candidate to walk the line with our allies publicly while doing the right thing behind the scenes. So I trust you will do the right thing once elected. I just hope your pro-Israel stance doesn't prevent you from winning the election. And I know you're a peace candidate, but your selective language highlighting Iran's involvement with Hamas while ignoring their largest known funder, Qatar, because they're a U.S. ally, highlights to me that someone as nuanced as you is just repeating foreign policy talking points of AIPAC that advance in Israeli interests, not speaking the truth as you do on every other issue. So just to wrap up, it's my opinion that the closeness between Mossad and CIA means it's not possible for an anti-Zionist candidate to win the presidency. So I will continue to support you, even if you take this stance publicly, as I support the boycott, divest, and sanction movement. And I protest and advocate for the end of Israeli apartheid and a free Palestine from the river to the sea, so Jews and Arabs can once again peacefully live amongst each other like they did before the start of the colonial Zionist project. So thank you, Mr. Kennedy, and I hope you revise your opinion.
Excellent argument, Jay. Thank you so much for joining us.